Welcome to Faces Friday. Thanks very much for joining me. I'm Lynn Sherritt. We're going to talk about something that really is quite complicated, and that's assessment and evaluation. What's the same? What's different? And I've been interviewed many times and asked this question. And here's a question again from the Melbourne Archdiocese of Catholic Schools. Marwin Osterberry is asking me the question about growth versus evaluation. When I think about assessment, I think about diagnostic assessment. That's before a unit of study begins, so assessment for learning. I think about formative assessment. That's the ongoing assessment during a unit of study, so assessment as learning. And finally, I think about summative assessment, assessment of learning at the end of a unit. And for me, that piece is evaluation. It's our duty to report how students are traveling to parents and guardians. So it's that summative statement of how students are doing. What's really important to me is that summative becomes diagnostic. And that might be a new thought for you, but I see assessment as a cycle. Begins with diagnostic, moves to formative, becomes summative that then can inform diagnostic assessment. Let's have a listen to this interview.
Lynn, you've talked a lot about growth. I'm just wondering about evaluation and where you've observed this at its best and where it may not be acting at its best, really.
Yeah. Well, when I think about growth, I think about that process of developing data walls. So data walls for me are conversation pieces. They're question pieces about where a student is and what are the next steps in instruction so that the student grows. And data walls become wallpaper when they're just about the NAPLAN scores and the achievement, but they become actually living documentation when we can see where a student has been and we can experience the growth in the student and talk about what was that all about, what happened, and then what will the next steps for instruction be. So evaluation to me is a whole different area. So it's probably important to develop our common language. So assessment for me is about for learning, as learning, and then summative being of. Evaluation for me is that looking back, it reminds me of teacher performance appraisal. And I believe that we have to separate those terms. So assessment is that ongoing, daily, knowing where students are, knowing where our learners are, knowing where our teachers are, to promote growth and progress, knowing how to teach each student. Evaluation, on the other hand, seems to me it's a final, it's a point in time where we're at. Is that your understanding of
Yes, a point in time, but there's more to it than that, isn't there? It's about going on the journey.
Exactly. So I really feel that thinking about that, I really feel that our evaluation or our summative needs to inform our diagnostic. So it becomes a cycle, not an endpoint.
Yeah, where we go to next.
Exactly. So evaluation, as long as it's definitely about just a conversation about where we go to next, is informative. But evaluation needs to become diagnostic. Thank you. Thanks very much for joining me on this Faces Friday. Assessment, growth, evaluation, such large concepts. And I'm wondering what you're thinking about in terms of growth, that diagnostic and formative assessment, versus evaluation, summative assessment. Do you really think that summative assessment can inform diagnostics or what our next steps are? Thanks a lot for joining me and thinking this through with me. See you next week.